It was a fiery speech by US President Donald Trump at the United Nations General Assembly session in New York, where he hit out at the UN itself. He began by criticizing the UN, saying that the world body has often failed to solve global problems, and in his words, has even funded assaults on Western borders. Yet he added that the UN still holds tremendous potential if its members are willing to use it effectively. Now, migration was at the center of his address. Trump called uncontrolled migration the top issue of our times. He accused the United Nations of fueling the crisis instead of stopping it, and warned that Europe has been invaded by illegal migrants like the world has never seen. He said that European leaders are paralyzed by political correctness and failing to protect their own countries.
Your countries are being ruined. The United Nations is funding an assault on Western countries and their borders. In 2024, the UN budgeted $372 million in cash assistance to support an estimated 624,000 migrants journeying into the United States. Think of that. The UN is supporting people that are illegally coming into the United States, and then we have to get them out. The UN also provided food, shelter, transportation, and debit cards to illegal aliens. Can you believe that? On the way to infiltrate our southern border. Millions of people came through that southern border. Just a year ago, millions and millions of people were pouring in, 25 million altogether over the 4 years of the incompetent Biden administration. And now we have it stopped, totally stopped. In fact, they're not even coming anymore because they know they can't get through. But what took place is totally unacceptable. The UN is supposed to stop invasions, not create them and not finance them. In the United States, we reject the idea that mass numbers of people from foreign lands can be permitted to travel halfway around the world, trample our borders, violate our sovereignty, cause unmitigated crime, and deplete our social safety net. We have reasserted that America belongs to the American people, and I encourage all countries to take their own stand in defense of their citizens as well.
Trump also doubled down on his long-held skepticism over climate change. He dismissed it as the greatest con job ever, saying that global warming, cooling, or climate change, all of it was nothing more than a scam.
Global warming and the carbon footprint. It's a con job. At extreme cost and expense, Europe reduced its own carbon footprint by 37%. Think of that. Congratulations, Europe. Great job. You cost yourself a lot of jobs, a lot of factories closed, but you reduced the carbon footprint by 37%. However, for all of that sacrifice and much more, it's been totally wiped out and then some by a global increase of 54%. Much of it coming from China and other countries that are thriving around China, which now produces more CO2 than all the other developed nations in the world. So all of these countries are working so hard on the carbon footprint, which is nonsense, by the way. It's nonsense.
On Russia, Trump said that the war in Ukraine was not making Russia look good. He criticized both China and India for buying Russian oil and faulted NATO nations for continuing to rely on Russian energy supplies despite the ongoing conflict. Trump also made a bold claim that in just 7 months of his presidency, his administration had ended 7 unendable wars. Without offering details, he pointed to regions like Pakistan and India, where he said Washington has worked to reduce tensions. We have Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, former Indian diplomat, now joining us. We also have Kabir Naqvi with us from our newsroom. Ambassador Prabhudeval, I'm just going to come to you. Like, just so much to unpack in this address, Kabir. But the biggest of them all is that he was standing on the stage of the United Nations and he was lambasting the United Nations, saying that they didn't even provide him a good teleprompter for his speech or a decent escalator for him to reach the venue.
You're absolutely right, Krishna. At the end of the speech, it felt as if Donald Trump was expecting the entire crowd to stand up and give him a standing ovation. I think that didn't happen, and he sort of like moved toward the elbow and the shoulder of the stage. But him lambasting the United Nations, going on to say that your loose words and empty words is not something that is going to stop the wars, let alone from the ramparts of the White House. He said it on the stage of the United Nations General Assembly, the 80th of that, in New York. So lambasting the United Nations, that's one aspect to take a look at. He said that you're not doing enough. It's me who's doing the mediation when it actually should be you. So lambasting the United Nations is one aspect to take a look at. His, distorting the facts, like you rightly mentioned, hitting out at China and India. He says he's the global peacemaker. He's stopped 7 wars in the last 7 months with special mentions between India and Pakistan. And we all know what exactly happened between the DGMOs of both these nations and what exactly prevailed in terms of, the high-level hectic parlays and the DGMO level talks between these two nations. Terror and trade will not flow together. Our Prime Minister has drawn those lines quite clearly for everybody else. And the delegation that went across the rest of the world trying to tell the people that Pakistan's biggest export is nothing but terrorism. That's one aspect. He lambasted the United Nations. He distorted the facts. And what's more is that he's gone on and called the global, climate change and the global warming a complete hoax. He scolded the European nations saying, you're going down, to hell. He singled out Lula da Silva, the Brazilian, leader. He said, okay, I met him when I was entering and he was leaving. We gave each other a hug. The bottom line is that we like each other. He likes me, I like him. But I did not know that I'm going to say this to you from the dais, which was that Brazil are doing very poorly. So he's hit out at everybody. But let's start firstly with, him lambasting the United Nations. Now, we've
Kabir,
seen so many
let's
of those
stand at that stage before we go any further. Quickly listen to him, complaining against the UN for not providing him with a good escalator and a decent teleprompter. Let's listen in.
I ended 7 wars, dealt with the leaders of each and every one of these countries, and never even received a phone call from the United Nations offering to help in finalizing the deal. All I got from the United Nations was an escalator that on the way up stopped right in the middle. If the First Lady wasn't in great shape, she would have fallen. But she's in great shape. We're both in good shape. We both stood. And then a teleprompter that didn't work. These are the 2 things I got from the United Nations, a bad escalator and a bad teleprompter.
Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, the more problematic part of that statement is not about complaining about the broken teleprompter and an escalator that stopped in the middle. The claim that he ended 7 wars. Which 7 wars are these in the first place?
Well, first of all, let me say that his remark about the escalator was perhaps a little light-hearted. Yeah. He was meaning it as a jest.
But he was complaining against the UN for not giving him enough credit. All said and done, he's angling for the Nobel Peace Prize with that statement.
Yes, of course. But, his comment about ending 7 wars is highly questionable. And, of course, since he refers again and again to having mediated in the India-Pakistan conflict, as Kabir very correctly pointed out, this claim is bogus because it was directly done by India, because the DGMO of Pakistan approached the DGMO of our side and they agreed. So there was no mediation by a third party. We have made it very clear. The war ended because we had mounted so much of pressure on Pakistan that they couldn't take it anymore and they sued for peace. Now, President Trump is correct in saying that the United Nations has failed to live up to its expectations. But what is the reason for that? The reason is that the United Nations has completely outlived the structure on which it was built. The United Nations was set up in 1945. And as our Prime Minister has pointed out again and again, the world has changed dramatically since then. India was not even an independent country in 1945. Today, India is the world's fourth largest economy, the largest country in terms of population. It is a global player. So why should a country like India not be in the UN? The UN needs to be reformed.
Yeah.
We have again and again pointed this out. And because of the fact that the United Nations has really outlived the structure on which it was built, it is not able to cope up with the challenges. Let me mention that while President Trump criticized the UN, one of the reasons why the UN fails in its task of peacekeeping is because of the veto power which is enjoyed by the P5. They prevent solutions to war. Look at what has happened in Gaza. The US has repeatedly exercised its veto, and thus it has enabled the Israeli aggression against Hamas and the Palestinians to go on unchecked. Again, in the Russia-Ukraine war, Russia has vetoed certain, resolutions which tried to bring about peace. So the veto power is the biggest obstacle. If any meaningful reform of the United Nations has to take place, it has to begin with the structure of the Security Council, which is the body which is tasked with maintaining peace. And this reform should include bringing in countries which matter today and which are excluded from the decision-making authority. These countries would, of course, include India, Germany, Japan, Brazil, which are members of the P4, which was set up by them to champion the cause of UN reform and also seek a membership of the UN Security Council on a permanent basis. So, in other words, while President Trump is correct in saying that the United Nations has failed to bring about peace, he has not pointed the finger at the real reason, and that is the need to reform the Security Council and, of course, other bodies of the United Nations. And the P5 members themselves prevent the reform. They are the ones who feel that they stand to lose their
Right.
veto power in case the United Nations Security Council is reformed and other countries are brought in. So they are the problem. They are, President Trump's United States of America is part of the problem. It is not going to be a part of the solution.
Absolutely.
And all his crying horse is not going to convince anybody of what the reality of the situation is.
Yeah, that is one. And the other problem where the reality situation will not change is his constant tirade against India on two counts. One is that, India, funding the war in Ukraine by buying Russian oil. And the second is that repeated mention of how he brought about peace between India and Pakistan. And this even as trade negotiations are underway as we speak between India and the US.
Yes, absolutely. We have no expectations from him, very frankly. The kind of statements which have come from him directly and from his team have been very hurtful, and they have shown that the Indo-US relationship has suffered greatly on account of all such statements. Of course, for instance, he called India a dead economy, and he's referred to India as the king of tariffs. Peter Navarro has been extremely strident in his remarks, very hurtful. So how can we conceive of America as being a friend of ours if such statements are coming from their side? Now, as regards this whole business of buying oil from Russia, we have made it very clear that we will do what is in our national interest, and it is in our interest to buy energy at subsidized and cheaper rates from Russia. So we will continue to do that. Now, as far as the trade deal is concerned, yes, it has reached very great obstacles, but the United States is hurting. The US economy is itself showing signs of great strain, and economists in this country are pointing out that Trump needs to rethink this entire issue of tariffs. The matter has gone up to the Supreme Court. the lower courts had ruled against the tariffs. The Supreme Court is to decide, and well, one doesn't know which way the thing will go because the Supreme Court has got a Republican majority.
Okay.
The judges who were appointed by Republican presidents, they are in a majority. So it might just support President Trump's tariffs. But there is no denying the fact that the US economy is hurting greatly and that the tariffs are actually rebounding on America itself.
Fair enough. Stay with us. Let's quickly then listen into what Trump had to say. His tirade against both China and India for buying Russian oil.
China and India are the primary funders of the ongoing war by continuing to purchase Russian oil. But inexcusably, even NATO countries have not cut off much Russian energy and Russian energy products, which, as you know, I found out about 2 weeks ago, and I wasn't happy. Think of it. They're funding the war against themselves. Who the hell ever heard of that one? In the event that Russia is not ready to make a deal to end the war, then the United States is fully prepared to impose a very strong round of powerful tariffs, which would stop the bloodshed, I believe, very quickly. But for those tariffs to be effective, European nations, all of you are gathered here right now, would have to join us in adopting the exact same measures. I mean, you're much closer to this. We have an ocean in between. You're right there. And Europe has to step it up. They can't be doing what they're doing. They're buying oil and gas from Russia while they're fighting Russia.
Well, Kabir, Trump not saying anything new, but just surprising that he used the stage of UNGA to go on that rant against both China and India for buying Russian oil. And the other big thing is something that he's been talking about since his first term as the president of the US, calling climate change a big hoax and global warming a scam.
You're absolutely right. This time around, he also gave the example of Barack Obama. He says, back in the early 2010s, you had this word called carbon footprint. Take a look at carbon footprint. A big political leader would talk about carbon footprint, then get on a big plane, go to Hawaii, play some golf, and then come back on that big, beautiful plane. Everything's got to be big and beautiful with Donald Trump. And he says it's an old plane with old engines. So, he's gone on to say that this is a con job. He's gone on to say that this is a green energy scam. And he's citing examples. It's not that, of course, he does quote to raise, emphasis. He quotes anything as 300,000. I still have to go back to the data and look at whether this is actually 300,000 or not. But he says China is building windmills, but they don't use it. They use gas and coal. They give it to the rest of the world. Europe, the electricity prices are going up because you need air conditioners in the sweltering heat. And this is that vicious cycle, because global warming, is it a hoax or not? Maybe Ambassador Prabhu Dayal can dwell on that a little bit, but we're looking at climate change, aren't we?
Right. Fair point, Kabir. Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, my observation was that he went on a tirade against European nations and he made a mockery out of them when they claimed that they've reduced their carbon footprint by 37%. And he was like absolutely mocking them. What did you achieve by doing that? So this is Trump using climate change as well for his tirade against the European Union.
Donald Trump is in a minority of one when it comes to the issue of climate change. Nobody other than him amongst the global community of leaders believes that climate change is a hoax. The rest of the countries are dead serious about combating it. The Biden administration also realized that it is a very serious danger. Scientists are unanimous in pointing out the very harmful effects which climate change has had. So it is only President Trump who keeps on saying that it is a hoax. And as Kabir pointed out, in his first term also, he had taken this line. And in fact, he had pulled out the United States from the climate change conference. Now, what is the way out? He will continue to be an obstacle, but I think the rest of the world has to take concerted action to check climate change. So regardless of what he, the President of the United States, wants to say, and he feels that he is the world's most powerful man and the world must listen to him, I think on various matters, we can ignore what he says,
Yeah.
and we have to do what the right thing is. And the right thing is to fight climate change.
Yeah, and even Emmanuel Macron, who was stuck on the roads because of the security detail for Trump, he I'm sure doesn't agree with Trump, and he just called him up and told him that I'm frozen, everything is frozen here because of you. But Kabir, the one other issue, which in fact the main issue that he was going on and on about is immigration, migration. He is. And on that particular issue, he lambasted everybody from the United Nations to the European nations.
Yeah, he took the stage of the United Nations General Assembly, first and foremost, making this a political speech as well, because it's not entirely about, the nations coming together. He makes it a political campaign. He talks about the Christianity being, the most prosecuted, religion across the world. We saw what happened at the Charlie Kirk Memorial as well. But coming back to him lambasting everybody, he says, you're going downhill. Joe Biden wasn't spared. He said about 300,000 again. 300,000 people came to American shores. And how do these people and these illegal aliens, as he calls them, repay their kindness? They do that by crime onto the streets. So he's pointed out all the donkey dudes who says they go through some real suffocated areas. There are rapes, there are murders. Nobody should be going through something like that. So he's hit out at these illegal aliens. And take a look at this. This is in context with what's happened in Australia, with the far right, rallies that have been carried out. What's happening in the United Kingdom, where even zebra crosses are painted with the red cross of the British, flag. So we need to understand in contemporary politics and developments as to why he's saying all of this. Is the far right really here and to stay? Can they do without the immigrants over there? Illegal immigrants, legal immigrants, or should I say legal and illegal aliens? Who's to stay here? I mean, those are all things that one has to take a look at. But Donald Trump did not mince his words, Krishna.
Right. Donald Trump not mincing his word. I'm not sure not mincing it has ended up with him speaking the truth with so many distortions and so many claims that are not backed by facts. But all said and done, as always, when Trump talks, there's so much to unpack. And I'm afraid we're out of time here on that front. Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, thank you so much for taking time out to be this here on News9. And Kabir, thank you for joining us on the broadcast again.